The army medic came home to hear a baby crying in the abandoned shed behind his house. The hiss of the bus's air brakes was a sound of finality, a sigh of steel and pressure that released him back into a world he had only seen in his dreams for 2 years. Staff Sergeant Cole Miller stepped down onto the cracked asphalt of the Oak Creek bus depot, the familiar scent of damp pine and diesel fuel a jarring welcome against the memory of sand and scorched metal. The air was cool, heavy with the promise of an evening rain, a stark contrast to the relentless, baking sun that had been his constant companion. He cinched the strap of the duffel bag on his shoulder. It felt heavier than it should, weighted with more than just neatly folded uniforms and worn-out boots. It carried the ghosts of long nights in the aid station, the phantom pressure of tourniquets, the echoes of orders shouted over the scream of incoming fire. But it also carried the hope that had been his armor, the thought of this exact moment. He had told no one he was coming. Not his wife, Sarah. Not her mother. He wanted to see her face when he walked through the door. A surprise. A clean break from the life over there and a sudden, joyous return to the life here. The ultimate homecoming. Cole decided to walk the 2 miles to their house. The town was just as he'd left it, frozen in time. The same sleepy storefronts lined Main Street, the same oak trees formed a canopy over the quiet residential avenues. Every house held a memory. The Petersons' place with the tire swing he'd nearly broken his arm on as a kid. Old Mr. Henderson's prize-winning roses, still blooming in defiant reds and pinks. It was all so peaceful. So normal. A perfect diorama of the life he fought to protect. The quiet felt unnatural. His senses, honed by the constant threat of the unseen, were on high alert. He catalogued every sound, the distant bark of a dog, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, the hum of a lawnmower 2 streets over. His boots made soft, rhythmic thuds on the pavement, the only immediate sound in his personal space. He scanned the rooftops, the alleyways between houses. A habit he couldn't break. Over there, it kept you alive. Here, it just made him feel like a stranger in his own skin. He turned onto his street, Elm Terrace, and his heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of anticipation. He could already picture Sarah's reaction. The initial shock, the cry of disbelief, her arms wrapping around him, pulling him back into the world he belonged in. He'd hold her and breathe in the scent of her shampoo, and for the first time in years, he would feel safe. But as their small, blue saltbox house came into view, the rhythm in his chest faltered. A dissonant note in the symphony of his return. The lawn was a mess. Weeds choked the flower bed Sarah had tended with such devotion. The grass was knee-high in patches, a wild, neglected carpet of green and brown. The paint on the porch railing was peeling in long, curling strips, like sunburnt skin. An air of abandonment hung over the place, a visible shroud of decay. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. He quickened his pace, the heavy duffel bag bouncing against his back. He took the porch steps 2 at a time and reached for the doorknob. It turned without resistance. The door was unlocked. Sarah never left the door unlocked. Cole pushed it open and stepped inside. The air was stale and cold, carrying the faint, musty smell of dust and disuse. A thick layer of it coated every surface, the coffee table, the television screen, the mantelpiece where their wedding photo was supposed to be. But the photo was gone. Only a lighter rectangle of wallpaper marked its place. His training kicked in, overriding the rising tide of panic. He moved through the downstairs rooms with a quiet, practiced economy of motion. Assess the scene. Gather intel. In the kitchen, a single cup sat in the sink, a film of mold growing in the dregs of old coffee. A stack of mail, mostly junk and bills addressed to the current resident, lay on the counter, bound by a browning rubber band. The silence was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket. This wasn't just an empty house. It was a dead one. A place where a life had ended. He felt his throat tighten. Where was she? Where was his Sarah? He moved toward the back of the house, his gaze sweeping over the familiar layout that now felt alien and hostile. He looked through the glass of the back door, out into the overgrown yard. The old tool shed, leaning slightly to one side like a tired old man, stood at the far end of the property. He'd always meant to tear it down. And that's when he heard it. A sound so faint it was almost imperceptible, a thin, wavering cry that cut through the oppressive silence. A baby. Cole's blood ran cold. Every nerve ending screamed. He was back in the field, responding to a casualty. His mind raced, compartmentalizing. Threat assessment. Situation analysis. The sound was coming from the shed. He eased the back door open, the hinges groaning in protest, and stepped out into the humid air. He moved across the tangled grass, his steps silent, his body low. He didn't know what he was walking into, only that a child was in distress. He reached the shed's warped wooden door. It hung ajar. The crying was louder now, weak but insistent. He pushed the door open. The interior was dark and smelled of damp earth and rust. Light filtered through a single grimy window, illuminating a scene that his mind struggled to process. In the center of the small space, on a pile of old blankets inside a wooden crate, was a baby. It couldn't have been more than a few months old, its tiny face red and contorted as it cried. And next to the crate, on a makeshift cot, sat a young woman. She was rail-thin, with wide, terrified eyes fixed on him. She looked like a cornered animal, ready to bolt. For a moment, the world stopped. The soldier in him saw a potential threat. The medic saw two patients. The husband saw the final, incomprehensible confirmation that the world he had left was gone forever. He held up his hand slowly, palms out. A universal gesture. "I mean no harm." "It's okay," he said, his voice raspy, unfamiliar even to himself. "I'm not going to hurt you." The young woman flinched but didn't speak. She pulled a thin, tattered blanket tighter around her shoulders. Her eyes darted from his face to the duffel bag on his back, then back to his face. Cole's focus shifted to the baby. He knelt, his movement slow and deliberate. The infant's cries were becoming weaker, tinged with exhaustion. He needed to check its vitals, its temperature. He needed to get them out of this damp, cold shed. "I can help," he said, keeping his voice low and steady. "My name is Cole. I'm a medic. Can I check the baby?" The woman gave a slight, hesitant nod. Cole gently touched the baby's forehead. Clammy. He checked the fontanelle, it was slightly sunken. Dehydration. He looked around the shed. A half-empty bottle of water sat on the dirt floor, next to a small can of formula. "Not nearly enough." "We need to get you both inside," he said, his tone shifting from gentle to quietly authoritative. "It's warmer. We need to get the baby warm." He helped the young woman to her feet. She was unsteady, fragile as a bird. He guided her and the baby, who he now held cradled in one arm, back toward the house. The house that was supposed to be his. Stepping back inside, he was no longer just a returning husband, but a first responder at the scene of a disaster whose scope he was only beginning to understand. He settled them in the living room, wrapping the infant in his own field jacket for warmth while the young woman, who whispered her name was Maria, watched him with those same haunted eyes. He managed to get a few ounces of formula into the baby, who quieted almost immediately, its tiny body finally relaxing into sleep. The questions burned in his mind. Who was she? Why was she here? And the most important, most terrifying question of all, where was Sarah? He pulled out his phone. The battery was low, but it had a signal. He dialed Sarah's number. It rang once, then went straight to voicemail. "The number you have dialed is not in service, not in service." He tried her mother's number. The same automated message. A cold dread, heavier than any fatigue, settled deep in his bones. The pieces didn't fit. The neglected house. The disconnected numbers. The strangers in his shed. It was a puzzle with 1,000 sharp-edged pieces, and every one of them cut him. There was only one person who would know. One person who saw everything on Elm Terrace. Mrs. Gable, their next-door neighbor. An institution. He left Maria and the sleeping baby on the sofa, promising he would be right back, and walked out the front door, leaving it ajar. He crossed the overgrown lawn that separated his property from Mrs. Gable's perfectly manicured one. He knocked on her door. A moment later, it opened, and a small woman with a cloud of white hair and kind, curious eyes peered out at him. Her eyes widened in disbelief. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Cole," she gasped, her voice trembling. "Oh, my heavens. It can't be. Everyone thought you were." She couldn't finish the sentence. "Mrs. Gable," he said, his own voice tight. "I need your help." "Where is Sarah?" She ushered him inside, her house a world away from his own, warm, smelling of cinnamon and lemon polish. She sat him down at her kitchen table and poured him a glass of water, her hands shaking. "Oh, that poor girl," she began, her eyes welling with tears. "Cole, it was awful. About a year and a half ago, there was news. An attack. Your unit." Cole's stomach twisted. He remembered the attack. The blinding flash, the searing heat, the chaos. He'd been thrown from the vehicle, knocked unconscious, separated from the others. "The men in uniform came," Mrs. Gable continued, her voice barely a whisper. "They came to the house. I saw them from my window. They told Sarah you were missing in action. Then, a few weeks later, they came back. They told her you were gone. Presumed deceased." The words hit him like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. Dead. They had told her he was dead. The months he'd spent in a haze of pain and recovery in a hospital in Germany, the frustratingly slow progress, the spotty communication he'd blamed on military red tape, it all crashed down on him. His letters, the ones he'd painstakingly written, had never been sent. Or they'd been sent to a widow who had already buried a husband who wasn't him. "She fell apart, Cole," Mrs. Gable said softly. "Completely. She tried to hold on, she really did. But this house, it was full of you. Every room was a memory. She couldn't bear it. She sold it about 6 months ago. Packed up and moved to be with her sister in Oregon. She just wanted to disappear. The new owners, some family from the city, they haven't moved in yet. Some delay with their jobs. The house has just been sitting there. Empty." Cole stared into the glass of water, but he saw the face of the army chaplain on his porch. He saw the folded flag. He saw Sarah's world collapsing, and he hadn't been there to hold it together because her world thought he was no longer in it. The grief he saw on her face in his mind was a mirror of his own. The life he had been fighting his way back to had held a funeral for him and moved on. He was a ghost. A ghost haunting a house that wasn't his, a life that was no longer his to live. He thanked Mrs. Gable, his voice a hollow echo, and walked back to the derelict house. His house. His home. He now understood the neglect, the silence, the dust. He was standing in a tomb. When he walked back inside, Maria was awake, watching him with an expression that was no longer terrified, but deeply sad, as if she could see the wreckage of his world in his eyes. He sat down across from her. He had no right to be here. No right to ask her questions. He was the intruder now. But he had to know. "Why are you here?" he asked, his voice gentle. Slowly, haltingly, she told him her story. She had come from Honduras. Fled violence. She and her husband paid a coyote, who abandoned them in Mexico. Her husband was taken. She never saw him again. She made her way across the border alone, pregnant, terrified. She'd been living on the streets, drifting, hiding. She saw the empty house, a place that looked forgotten by the world. The shed was shelter. A place to have her baby in secret. She had no papers, no money, no one. Reporting her presence to any authority would mean being sent back to the place she'd nearly died escaping. Her son, Angel, would be taken from her. Cole listened, and a profound, aching understanding washed over him. He looked at this young woman and her child, two souls who were as lost and displaced as he was. They were fugitives from a broken world, seeking refuge in the ruins of his own. He was faced with a choice. He could walk away. It wasn't his problem. The house wasn't his. He could call the police, report the squatters, and let the system deal with them. That was the law. That was the easy path. Or he could help. He, a man declared dead, could choose to give life. His mission in the army had been clear: preserve life. Follow orders. Serve his country. But what was his mission now? He had no orders. He had no country in the way he once did, no home to return to. All he had was the training in his hands and the aching void in his chest. He spent the night on the dusty floor of the living room, his duffel bag serving as a pillow. The man who had left this house 2 years ago had been so sure of his place in the world. He had a wife, a home, a future. That man was gone. He died in the minds of everyone he loved. He died in an administrative error, a casualty of bureaucracy. The person who woke up in the cool light of dawn was someone else. A man untethered from his past, with no map for the future. He looked at Maria sleeping on the couch, her arm draped protectively over her son. He saw not a problem to be solved, but a mission to be undertaken. His war wasn't over. It had just changed locations. The battlefield was now a dilapidated house on Elm Terrace, and the objective was not to fight an enemy, but to save the innocent. He made his decision. He took a bus into the city the next day. He drained his savings account, the back pay the army had deposited for a man they thought was dead. It was a substantial amount. He used it to rent a small, clean, furnished one-bedroom apartment in a quiet part of town, paying 6 months in advance. He bought groceries, diapers, new clothes for Maria, and a proper crib for Angel. When he returned to the house, he didn't explain everything. He just said, "I found you a safe place." He drove them to their new home. The look on Maria's face when she saw the apartment, the clean sheets on the bed, the stocked refrigerator, the sunlight streaming through the windows, was a balm on his own raw wounds. For the first time, he saw her smile. A real, hopeful smile. His work wasn't done. He spent the next week navigating a different kind of minefield, the labyrinth of immigration law. He used his military discipline to research, to make calls, to find a small, reputable non-profit that specialized in asylum cases for Central American women. He made an anonymous donation and gave them a hypothetical case, a young mother, a baby, no papers. He got the name of a lawyer. He was building a perimeter of safety around them, one brick at a time. He finally found a working number for Sarah's sister in Oregon. The call was the hardest thing he had ever done, harder than walking into enemy fire. Her shock was followed by Sarah's, a choked, sobbing voice on the other end of the line. There was confusion, pain, and a universe of things that could never be unsaid or undone. They cried together over the phone, two people mourning a life that had been stolen from them both. They promised to talk again, to see each other eventually, but they both knew it was an epilogue. Their story was over. There was no anger, only a shared, bottomless sorrow. An acceptance of a tragic reality. Months passed. The autumn leaves on Elm Terrace turned to fire and fell, replaced by the stark, grey branches of winter. Cole didn't try to reclaim his old life. He couldn't. He joined a veteran support group, sitting in a circle with other men who were haunted by different ghosts. He got his paramedic certification and took a job with the city, trading the battlefields of Afghanistan for the urban emergencies of his own country. He found a new rhythm, a new purpose. He didn't abandon Maria and Angel. He became their quiet guardian. He would visit once a week, bringing groceries or just sitting with them, a silent, steady presence in their new life. He was T.O. Cole, a fixture as dependable as the sunrise. He watched Angel learn to roll over, to crawl, to pull himself up on the furniture. One crisp spring afternoon, a year after his return, Cole was with them at a local park. Maria was pushing Angel on the swings, her laughter bright and clear in the cool air. She looked healthy, her eyes no longer filled with fear but with a quiet strength. With the help of the lawyer, her asylum case was moving forward. She had hope. Cole sat on a nearby bench, watching them. A new family, forged in the ruins of an old one. He received a letter from Sarah last week. She had met someone. She was happy, she wrote. She hoped he was too. And in that moment, watching a child he had found in a shed take flight on a swing, he realized he was. His mission had changed. He hadn't come home to the life he'd left. He had come home to find a new one. His purpose was no longer to be the man who returned from war, but to be the man who built a sanctuary in its aftermath. The war was over. His duty was not. It was here, in the quiet moments of peace he fought to create for others. It was home.